Le Mali n'est pas un pays ingrat. Combien d'enfants portent le nom de François Hollande, à l'époque président de la République française? Mais aujourd'hui, nous savons lire entre les lignes. Nous avons compris que ça ne va pas. Donc on est obligé de dire non, non et...
Suppose you turn on the TV in Mali, and boom. Two major French channels, TF1 and LCI, are simply gone. No message, no explanation. Just blank screens staring back. And for a moment, you're not sure what feels stranger. The fuel crisis outside, or this quiet digital blackout inside your living room. Something's clearly happening, something bigger than a technical issue, and suddenly you're asking yourself, why did Mali do this? Let's find out. The thing about tense moments is that they don't need much to tip over. Sometimes it's not an explosion or a new attack or a political announcement that shakes a country. Sometimes it's just a sentence, a headline, a careless statement was sent across TV screens at the worst possible time. That's exactly what happened on November 9th, when TF1 and LCI, two massive French broadcasters, ran a report about Mali's fuel crisis. It looked like news, it sounded like news, but to Mali, it felt like something far more dangerous. Because what they said wasn't small, it wasn't a misunderstanding or a minor exaggeration. It was the kind of thing that, when heard during an already fragile situation, can genuinely change people's behavior. They claimed the junta had banned the sale of fuel across the country. That alone is enough to send people rushing to gas stations, hoarding what little remains, fighting in queues, and turning a shortage into a full-blown panic. And they didn't stop there. They said the regions of Kayes and Nioro were completely under blockade, as if no person, no vehicle, no ounce of hope could move in or out.
Next, the situation in the Sahel region of Africa. France, of course, was ordered to pull its troops out. They've been engaged in an anti-jihadist operation called Operation Barkhane, and this marked an end of France's long-standing relationship with the Sahel states that had once been under French colonial.
Now, you have to understand the emotional weight of words like completely. It's absolute, total. It paints a picture in the viewer's mind that nothing is functioning, nothing is safe, nothing is reachable. In a calm country, that's misinformation. In a tense country, that's a spark in dry grass. And then came the final line, the one that truly snapped Mali's patience. They claimed that insurgents were close to bringing down the capital, Bamako. Think about how that lands in a living room where electricity is faint, fuel is short, and rumors already travel faster than facts. It doesn't just inform people, it frightens them. It doesn't just describe the situation, it reshapes it. You might be wondering, okay, but couldn't Mali just correct them? Hold a press conference? Ask them to retract it? Normally, yes. That's the path most governments take. But this moment wasn't normal. Mali was already dealing with fighters blocking major fuel routes. The highways were under militant pressure, the fuel stations were packed, and citizens were already on edge. Therefore, Mali didn't have the luxury of slow diplomacy. The state saw those claims as more than false information. They were destabilizing. They risked pushing civilians toward panic, encouraging hoarding, and making the blockade feel more catastrophic than it was. So Mali acted in a way that felt sudden to the world, but made perfect sense inside the country. The High Authority for Communication cut TF1 and LCI off immediately, no back and forth. No apologies requested. Just a firm, instant shutdown. And if you think about it, that decisiveness reveals something. Mali believed the broadcasts weren't innocent mistakes. They were too perfectly timed, too dramatically framed, too potentially explosive for a nation already in crisis. But that brings us to the bigger question, the one beneath it all. Why was Mali so tense, so brittle, so close to the edge that even a TV report could push the government into this kind of reaction? To understand why Mali reacted so sharply to those broadcasts, you first have to understand what the country was already going through. This wasn't a normal fuel shortage, the kind that happens when a shipment is late or prices rise for a few weeks. Mali was dealing with something far more deliberate, a blockade designed to suffocate the country slowly. It started quietly in early September, when militants began targeting the major highways that fuel tankers used to enter Mali from Senegal and the Ivory Coast. At first, people thought it was just a few isolated incidents. A truck attacked here, A road is blocked there. But then the pattern emerged, and it was terrifyingly clear. The militants weren't attacking randomly. They were sealing off the country's oxygen line. Fuel isn't just something people put in cars. In a landlocked country like Mali, fuel is life. It powers generators, trucks, clinics, water pumps, refrigeration, and the entire informal economy. So when those highways got blocked, it wasn't just the cars running dry, it was everything. And people felt it instantly. Within days, Bamako's fuel stations turned into scenes you'd expect during a war. Long lines stretched down the street, wrapping around corners. Men leaned against their motorcycles, staring at the ground in frustration. Women sat in their parked cars with the windows down, fanning themselves, waiting for hours under the sun. And the worst part? The lines kept growing while the pumps kept emptying. Some stations ran out entirely. Others limited customers to tiny amounts. Taxi drivers slept in their cars overnight just to keep their place in line. You could feel the tension. You could almost taste it. People weren't angry at each other, not yet, but everyone knew how quickly shortages could turn desperate. And that's the atmosphere Mali was living in when TF1 and LCI claimed the government had banned fuel sales. Imagine hearing that when you've already spent 6 hours waiting for enough petrol to get home. Imagine hearing that while militant groups are blocking the very roads that bring fuel in. These highways aren't just transportation routes, they're veins. And the blockade wasn't just pressure, it was a chokehold, one tightening slowly, but very deliberately. The militants sealed the routes from Senegal. They sealed the routes from the Ivory Coast. They hit convoys strategically, avoiding big battles and instead going for the economic jugular. Therefore, Mali didn't see the blockade as just an attack on logistics. It saw it as an attack on stability, morale, public confidence, everything that keeps a society from spiraling. And the timing made it even worse. The country had already gone through political turbulence, military transitions, and rising tensions with Western nations. The last thing it needed was fuel scarcity, turning into widespread fear. So when foreign broadcasters described the situation as collapse, when they used language that painted Mali as already fallen, it wasn't just misinformation, it was fuel on the fire. It fed the very psychological pressure the militants were trying to create. And that's why Mali didn't wait. It felt the walls tightening from outside and the panic rising from inside. Which brings us to another question that people rarely ask out loud. Why did Western embassies start telling their citizens to leave Mali right when this blockade hit its peak? When Western embassies start telling their citizens to leave a country, people don't ignore it. They talk, they speculate, they worry. And honestly, they have every reason to. Embassies don't make evacuation recommendations casually. They don't wake up in the morning, glance at the news, and decide, you know what? Let's pull everyone out today. These decisions are calculated, measured, and usually based on intelligence the public never sees. So when the United States and France advised their citizens to leave Mali, it sent a wave of unease through the country. But here,
France is now urging its citizens to leave Mali as soon as possible, joining the United States and the United Kingdom in a coordinated exodus.
here's the twist most people miss. This evacuation wasn't only about the fuel blockade. Yes, the blockade made the situation tense. Yes, the shortages created uncertainty. But the embassies weren't reacting to petrol lines. They were reacting to power dynamics shifting beneath their feet. Because in the past 3 years, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso basically rewrote the whole political script of the Sahel and Western countries weren't ready for the new version. Think about what happened. These 3 nations, once deeply tied to Western military structures, suddenly walked away. They kicked out French troops. They suspended cooperation with European missions. They withdrew from ECOWAS. They started openly criticizing Western influence. And then, instead of operating alone, they turned toward each other and formed the Alliance of Sahel States AES, their own political and security bloc built on shared goals and regional independence. That's not a small move. It's a continental statement. So imagine being a Western embassy watching all of this unfold. Suddenly, the governments you used to negotiate with are no longer picking up the phone. The military bases you once relied on are shutting their gates. The influence you thought you had is fading. The strategies you planned for years no longer apply. Then, in the middle of all this, Militants impose a fuel blockade, and foreign media start spreading dramatic narratives about a capital on the verge of collapse. For an embassy, that's not just a security issue, it's a political earthquake. Therefore, Western embassies didn't tell their citizens to leave because Mali was collapsing. They told them to leave because their leverage in Mali was collapsing. They no longer had the same access, the same influence, or the same guarantees they had relied on for decades, and without those guarantees, they didn't want their citizens caught in a place where they, diplomatically speaking, had far less room to maneuver. But to ordinary Malians, it looked like something else entirely. When an embassy leaves, people automatically think things are about to get worse. It creates a psychological ripple. If Americans are leaving, if the French are leaving, does that mean danger is coming? That question spread through Bamako faster than fuel rumors. It deepened the tension that was already building. And ironically, it reinforced the very fear narrative that militants and foreign media were indirectly feeding. So the embassies weren't wrong to leave. But their departure added another layer to Mali's anxiety, the sense that the world was stepping back at the exact moment Mali needed calm, not chaos. And that leads to the next big question. How did France, the region's strongest foreign presence for decades, lose almost all of its influence so quickly? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. To understand why Mali's shutting down 2 French channels hit so hard, you have to look at the bigger story. The slow, steady, almost unbelievable decline of French influence in the Sahel. And honestly, it didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It wasn't a single collapse. It was more like a long unraveling, thread by thread, until suddenly France looked down and realized the entire fabric was gone. For decades, France was the dominant outside force in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Military bases, political advisors, economic deals, cultural influence, media presence, it was all entrenched. French soldiers patrolled Sahelian dunes. French diplomats shaped security strategies. French companies managed resources. French channels shaped the narrative. That last one is important, because the media isn't just information, it's influence. It's the emotional anchor. It's how the world learns what to care about, what to fear, what to believe. But something shifted after years of instability, insurgent attacks, and unmet promises. Malians didn't feel safer. Burkina Faso didn't feel safer. Niger didn't feel safer. People started wondering why, with all this French presence, the situation wasn't improving. And that frustration slowly turned into resentment, then into suspicion, then into a political movement. When the military governments came to power, they surfed on this wave of public anger, and France wasn't ready for that first. Mali told France to withdraw its troops. Paris was stunned. Then Burkina Faso did the same. Paris was shaken. But the biggest shock came from Niger, the country that France considered its most reliable partner. In 2023 and 2024, Niger not only expelled French troops but also nationalized a uranium mine run by a major French company. That wasn't just a political loss, it was economic, strategic, and symbolic. It was like removing the heart of France's influence in the region. You don't come back easily from that. And as France's military and economic grip loosened, the one power it relied on the most, the narrative, grew even more important. French media had been the loudest megaphone in West Africa for years. Channels like TF1, LCI, France 24, and RFI shaped perception. They defined conflicts. They framed politics. They influenced public opinion both inside Africa and internationally. Even when they reported accurately, the perspective was still Europe-centered. The camera lens always pointed downward. So when Mali, a former colony, finally said, "Enough! You can't broadcast here," it was more than a license suspension. It was a psychological blow. It was the moment France realized it wasn't just losing troops or contracts, it was losing the last weapon it thought it would always have. The ability to tell Africa's story before Africans did. And that's why France reacted so defensively. Because once a country controls its own narrative, foreign influence shifts from powerful to peripheral. It's no longer the storyteller. It's just another voice in the noise. And this leads us to the next important question. Why does controlling the narrative matter so much in a conflict like the one Mali is facing now? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. If you really want to understand why Mali reacted so sharply to those French broadcasts, you have to look beyond fuel, beyond roads, beyond militants with guns. The real battleground, the one that decides whether a society stays stable or spirals into crisis, is inside people's minds. And in moments like this, information becomes more powerful than bullets. It sounds dramatic, but it's true. Because here's how modern conflicts work now. Militants don't actually need to take over a city to weaken it. They just need people inside the city to believe it might fall. They don't need to physically block every road. They just need people to think every road is unsafe. And they don't need to attack every day. They just need the public to feel like an attack could come at any moment. Fear does half the work for them. That's why the blockade was so effective. They didn't attack every convoy. They attacked just enough to send a message. They didn't block every route. They blocked the routes people rely on the most. It wasn't about shutting Mali down completely. It was about making Mali feel shut down. And when fear spreads, even the smallest disruption looks like collapse. Now imagine adding foreign media into that atmosphere. Media with huge reach, slick production, and strong emotional impact. Imagine hearing them say, "Capital near collapse," while you're already standing in a 6-hour fuel line, worried you won't get home. Imagine hearing that K's and Nioro are completely sealed while you're trying to call a friend who lives there. Imagine hearing the junta has banned fuel sales while you're staring at the last half-liter left in your tank. That doesn't just inform people, it shapes their behavior. It pushes them to panic buy whatever they can. It makes them spread rumors faster. It turns whispers at fuel stations into full-blown anxiety, and if a nation is already tense, those feelings can snowball into something much bigger. Therefore, from Mali's perspective, shutting down TF1 and LCI wasn't censorship. It was defense, not against the media, but against fear. Because the wrong message at the wrong time doesn't just mislead people, it destabilizes them. And a destabilized population is easier for militants to manipulate. That's why Mali sees the narrative as part of the conflict. And honestly, they're right. You can deploy soldiers to guard a highway. You can escort fuel trucks with armored vehicles. You can build alliances and secure borders. But if fear takes over the population, no amount of military force can fix that. Once people lose confidence, everything feels fragile, even when the facts say otherwise. This is why the narrative matters. Why every headline matters. Why every phrase matters. Because if militants attack physically, and the media even unintentionally amplifies the psychological impact, the country gets hit twice. Once on the road, once in the mind. And that leads to the biggest, most important question in this entire story. What does Mali's reaction say about the future of African sovereignty and who gets to tell Africa's story? What Mali did wasn't just about shutting off 2 TV channels. It was about something much bigger, something Africa has been moving toward for years without always saying it out loud. For generations, African countries have lived with the feeling that somebody else was holding the microphone. Someone else told their stories, explained their problems, interpreted their crises, and narrated their victories through an outside lens, and most of the time, African nations had no choice but to listen. But that moment is fading, fast, and Mali's decision was one of the clearest signs yet that the old dynamic is collapsing. Because when a country cuts off a powerful foreign broadcaster, it's not just making a technical decision, it's making a statement. It's saying, "We'll speak. You won't speak for us." And honestly, that hits differently in a region where storytelling has always been a form of power. Colonialism wasn't just armies and borders, it was also narratives. It was the control of who gets portrayed as weak, who gets portrayed as unstable, who gets portrayed as dangerous, and who gets portrayed as the hero. Taking that control back matters. And here's the interesting thing. Mali didn't replace TF1 and LCI with silence. It replaced them with its own voice. Local journalists, regional broadcasters, AES intelligence updates, and community radio all stepped into the gap. It wasn't a blackout, it was a shift in authorship, a shift from foreign narration to internal narration. And that shift is what makes this moment historic. You can feel the change across the Sahel. Niger is rewriting contracts with massive energy companies. Burkina Faso is reforming its security network with its own priorities in mind. Mali is reshaping its alliances, choosing partners based on sovereignty rather than dependency. All three countries walked away from ECOWAS, something that would have seemed unthinkable a decade ago. They didn't do it out of recklessness. They did it because they were tired of being managed. And if you zoom out, you start to see a pattern across the continent. African nations are questioning old structures, old alliances, old truths that were once treated as unchallengeable. You see it in East Africa's industrial growth, in Central Africa's resource nationalization, in Southern Africa's energy decisions. Everywhere you look, the continent is becoming louder, more confident, more assertive. Therefore, when Mali suspended those broadcasters, the world interpreted it as censorship. But inside the Sahel, it felt like self-respect. It felt like a boundary being drawn. It felt like a nation saying, if you're going to talk about us, you're going to do it respectfully and responsibly, or not at all. And the truth is, this moment won't stay contained in Mali. Other African countries are watching. They're paying attention. They're wondering what it would look like to take back their own narratives too. Because once one nation picks up the microphone, the others start to realize they've had one within reach the whole time. Which raises the final unavoidable question, not for Mali, but for the entire continent. Now that Africa is learning to tell its own story again, who else is ready to unplug the old voices and start speaking for themselves? Let us know in the comments section. Should the whole of Africa speak up? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.